Please welcome to the stage the wonderfully talented Jared Harris. I wanted to start by asking you, when you were sent the script for this, did they have to say to you, make sure you read past the first 60 pages?
Well, no, I didn't get any caveats. No, I mean, I actually found it really a page turner from the very, very beginning. I mean, because I wasn't in it. I was like, wait, where's my part?
Yeah.
That thing, yeah.
Where's my character gone?
Yeah, it was good for 5 pages, and then no, they told me that it was the main character, and obviously, I knew they had all 4 episodes, and that the 5th one hadn't been finished yet. So, yeah, I wasn't feeling nervous about that. When I started to read some of the longer scenes where I have to explain a lot of science, that made me nervous.
You do such a wonderful job in conveying the science behind what's going on. How much did you feel like you needed to understand the actual mechanisms of nuclear power?
Yeah, you have to understand what you're talking about. I mean, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a classical text or whether you're explaining what radiation is, you need to understand what it is. I mean, the thing is, that's what's really Craig did a great job of making it easy to understand, so you sort of feel smart just by listening to it, and he needed to make it easy to understand because actors had to explain it, and we generally, there's a reason why we didn't become scientists or businessmen. So if we can get it, then. But you do have to figure out what it is that what we're referring to and what the processes are, and it gets more complicated later. And then sometimes you have to do it upside down and backwards as well. When you're the helicopter scene where that was a little bit shorter than it originally was. But yeah, you need to understand what it is.
And then how about the dichotomy of you deliver some quite lengthy monologues where you're getting very technical, but you also do such a great job at delivering it in an emotional way. And how did you kind of make sure that you were always getting that side into your delivery?
Well, that's a really good question, because you have to get it under your belt, and then it can't just be exposition, because that's boring. And they can just open a book and educate themselves that way, So there needs to be stakes involved, and then then you have to try and figure out how you can, at what points you find different rhythms within the scene, and which was that first scene in episode 2. That was sort of easy because you walk in and there's Gorbachev, So that's pretty intimidating right away, and then you realize that these guys they're just going to cover the whole thing up. They've completely missed the boat, and that you're going to have to stand up and tell them something that they don't want to hear. And normally in that society, if you told people something that they didn't want to hear, you'd either get a bullet in the back of the head or you go to Siberia. So immediately that he was aware of, he was taking risks. And also it was really serious. If what he thought had happened, then, well, the planet was in danger, so, yeah.
I'm also interested in your approach to how you constructed your character, because we actually don't know too much about his life. We know very much at the core of who he is, but we don't know who were his family, what was his life like growing up. Did you feel a need to construct a lot of that, and kind of how much background did you give him for yourself?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because whenever you play historical characters, you do a dive into the research, and it's really useful because there's photographs that are out there. There's quite often, there might be footage out there. Sometimes there's audio tapes, so you can listen to somebody. So, for example, when I played George VI, you can hear all of he's made speeches. There's Christmas addresses that he would make, and you get a lot of stuff from that. This is the first time that I did all that research, and none of it was helpful. And but there was a reason for it, and that was Craig. So Legasov was married, and he had children, and Craig decided that he just wanted to ignore that fact because he didn't want to have to stop the momentum of the narrative and then have to have scenes where he's calling his wife or when are you coming home or the sort of scenes that we've seen 1,000 times and they don't really add anything to the story. So he decided that he was just going to follow the forward momentum of the story, which meant that when I read the script, he wasn't married and he didn't have children because they weren't in the story. And also, the real Legasov had a lot of, he had that sort of Russian Slavic swagger to him. He was a powerful man, and he had that sort of confidence, that alpha confidence to him. And this character doesn't, And the reason why he doesn't is he's in contrast to Stellan's character. And they didn't want two of them the same way, so this character became different. So at that point, I just put all that stuff aside and said, I'm playing Craig's character. And because that's the version of that which suits his story and his narrative. So in that sense, none of that stuff was helpful. And then you start to try and answer questions yourself about, well, why does this person... He becomes more fictionalized in that sense. And then we sort of discovered this idea that was somebody who wasn't socially comfortable, and he wasn't brilliant at interacting with people, and so that he has a journey in that sense. And he wasn't politically aware. He was pretty useless at playing the political game, and which obviously gets him into trouble. But so it became a completely fictionalized character in that sense.
And because you mentioned playing against Stellan, the scenes where you're in it together are so wonderful and you spar off each other with great energy. Did you kind of have conversations with each other about what your energy level and your approach to each other was going to be in those combative scenes?
Well, we had a very simple conversation, and that was that I told Stellan that he was the alpha male. And that he was always... you play this game in drama school and acting classes where you take a deck of cards and you have an ace of spades and you have a two of clubs and you have a whole bunch of cards in between. And you give them to the actors, but they're not allowed to look at them, and they put them on their forehead. And then just from the way that people interact with them, you have to figure out what card you've got. And then you line up after about 20 minutes in a row from highest to lowest. Highest always gets it right. Lowest always gets it right. The court cards normally get it right. There's a sort of a mix-up somewhere between 8 and the jack sometimes. One or two of them would be mixed up, but generally they always get it right. So Stellan was the ace of spades and I was the two of clubs.
And you got it right.
Yeah, but also it sort of worked because it fed into that story, which was similarly to Emily's character, which is they're the smartest people in the room, but nobody pays attention to them. No one's listening to them. Nobody believes them. Even if they do, they don't care. As that guy says, when she says, I'm a nuclear physicist and you used to run a shoe factory, and he says, yeah, I prefer my opinion. And that's what they were confronting all the time. So for him to get anything done, he had to go through Stellan. So he had no agency in that sense. He had no power. So it sort of seemed to make sense. So Stellan was happy with it, with our agreement.
And because you mentioned Craig, did you have that much access to him as the writer to be able to ask him a lot of questions that you wanted about your character's intentions?
Yeah, lots of. Before we started, I sat with him several times and discussed the story and the scripts, and you have questions that you ask, and lots of stuff like that. And sometimes something changes, and sometimes you realize, you had a misconception about something, and you go back and rework it in your head so you understand what he's after,
And did having one director for all of the episodes really lend itself?
Really important. Yeah, I asked that question before I signed on, if there was going to be one director. Because if there isn't going to be one director, then the showrunner really has to be there the whole time. Because what happens is that you have this relationship by proxy, and then people get nervous about making any audibles on the field, if you like, and they've been given these instructions, but no plan is foolproof. No plan is ever. If you have a plan 4 months before you start shooting, and then you do exactly the plan every day, it's probably not going to be great, because something has to happen when you're filming it. That there's some sort of alchemy that happens between the people who are there, and Craig wasn't going to be able to be there the whole time. But Johan was. So you have a proper relationship with that director. Also, if you have, you have these shows where they have different directors come on board, and you've been doing it for a while. I directed an episode of Mad Men. I'm not going to tell John Hamm anything about Don Draper that he doesn't know. He's been playing the part for 7 years. So what am I going to tell him? And it would be rude of me to try and insinuate that I've had some incredible insight, So what happens with directors is you end up educating the directors each time they come on they haven't read all the scripts, they haven't seen them. So it's just it's much more efficient, and the shorthand is really helpful.
I'd actually been planning to ask you about directing Mad Men later on, but we can hit on it now. I was just curious what led to that desire to direct an episode, and how did that come about, and what did you learn from doing it?
He wrote me off. He felt guilty, and I thought this is a great time to ask him. Yeah, I wanted to, because obviously John Slattery had done it, and John Hamm had done it, and John Hamm came to me at the beginning of that season 5 and said, you should really think about doing this. Of course, I didn't know what he knew. So I was really curious about it, and it was on my last day on set, and Matt was having some sort of separation, not anxiety, but he's saying, I'm really sorry. I also knew it was going to be great for me, for the storyline, And I suggested it. I said, why don't I? He said, I really want to work with you again. I said, well, why don't you let me direct an episode? And he said, I called him, and he was like, yeah, that's let me think about that. And so it worked out. It was great fun. I really, really, really enjoyed it. And again, to be completely frank, that show mostly would be directing itself. The DP knows what Matt wants. If I suggested a shot, he'd go, this is a really interesting shot and it'd be great, but Matt's not going to use it, and it's going to take us an hour and a half to do it, so I'm not doing it. Just think of something else. Come up with something else. Because he would know what would fly and what wouldn't. And the days were long. You were 13, 14-hour shooting days, so you didn't want to waste any time. And mostly the job of the director on something like that is you've had the script a lot longer than the actors have had it. And most of your work is to remind the actors of the story that they haven't filmed yet, they haven't done. So you're connecting scenes together that we might be shooting in 5 days' time, and you're shooting out of order. And you work with the day players and the people who've just come on for that single episode, and because a lot of those guys are nervous, because it's a big show, and they know who these actors are, and there's an intimidation factor, and you're just trying to get them to relax, and they're good because they've been hired and they've got good resumes and they know what they're doing. You're just trying to get them to relax so that they can play, because that's what always happens. You can be as relaxed as you want to be during the master shots, but the second you come in for coverage, and you can see it happen to everybody. And you're just trying to get people to sort of free up and start playing again. And you only have, in my first day, I did 5 takes, and Scott Hornbacher came to me and just said, you can't keep doing this many takes. 5 takes, you can't have that many. You've got to do it in 3.
Is it something you have more of a desire to do? Because I think if you negotiated a deal every time your character got knocked off in a show,
yeah,
you'd have a long resume of directing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should try that. I would love to do it again. I've tried. It's a tough thing, you have to take time off from your acting career, and a lot of you guys, I'm sure, are actors, and it's a nervy thing to do because it's about momentum, So if you stop doing it for a year to go and direct a project, that's it's a long time, yeah. So. And the directing for television, I would love to do that again. But again, there's people who have been doing it all their lives. They've got a lot of experience. There's a slight little bit of like, here's an actor trying to do it now, and they do it for their career, and this guy's sort of joyriding. you know. And then there's also a real determination on the part of the studios to get more women and minorities behind the camera. So, which is a good thing to do. So, yeah, I haven't had an opportunity yet. Another one.
Well, hopefully we get to see more of it. Going back to the show a little bit, I was curious how much you felt a need to become familiar with Soviet culture and kind of overall at the time. Like, I know that the costumes even were legitimate material and very uncomfortable. Yeah. So how immersed did you become in all of it?
Well, you put that stuff on and it's just, it wears you know. We pretty quickly realized that Vanity Fair wasn't going to do a Chernobyl fashion shoot. We did. Well, I think my second costume fitting, and Odile Dix, who's a brilliant costume designer, she said, "Is there any colour you don't like?" And I said, "Yes, beige." And all my costumes were beige. But you just got to go with it. That obviously that stuff helps. The set design helps. Even the glasses helped. I mean, what was interesting was she had a seamstress who used to work in the Soviet Union in the factories, and they said, well, they would never once you had a suit, they would never then tailor it to fit you. It was just they had sort of 3 sizes, and whichever one was closest to you, you just put it on, and that was it, and it would sort of just hang off you, yeah. And what was? And we didn't. They were really. It was tough fabric, so it never kind of molded towards you. It was sort of you're walking in a tent the whole time.
What was the experience like? Yeah. Not of authenticity down here. What was the experience like? Because you were shooting on an old, disused nuclear power plant in Lithuania.
The exteriors. We shot there for a week in Ignalina. The power plant in Ignalina is in Lithuania, and it is an exact replica of the Chernobyl power plant. The Soviets built 23 of them around their whole empire, and they all were built to the same design, so they all have the same design flaw in them. And when Lithuania joined the EU, they said, yeah, you can join, but you have to decommission that plant because it's exactly the same design as the Chernobyl plant. So they were decommissioning it at the time that we were there, and they would say, oh, yeah, it's all safe. There's no nuclear fuel here. Everything's safe. And then I remember one day we weren't allowed to come in and film there until 4 in the afternoon. And we said, well, why are we coming in so late? And they says, oh, it's Thursday's the day we take the fuel out. You know, so it was still there, you know. But but that building was, we were under armed guard the entire time. We had guards with machine guns on us, and it was very, very serious. We never got inside the building. It was just always outside. But and then everything else inside were set. So I think at one point they were talking to them about shooting inside. They have a control room, a mock-up control room at the power plant where they train people on. And at one point they were talking about that. But I think there was security concerns about it.
Yeah. And how did shooting on location there and then in Kiev help with you kind of getting inside of your character and with your own performance?
Well, Kiev was really interesting because Kiev doubled for Moscow. And for the exteriors of Moscow. And when we were there, we were told, don't drink the milk, don't eat mushrooms. There was still an issue. And Putin was shelling the eastern side of the country. So, and everybody in the Ukraine between the ages of 18 and 40, they were all going through conscription, so you'd see all these people walking around in military fatigues. So that was pretty alarming. But I mean, that sort of brought a certain sense of reality very quickly home about it.
And working with Stellan, is there anything that you really learned from him about craft and performing? Because he's such a stalwart in the industry.
Yeah, he said something very interesting to Emily. On their first job. If you'll remember, they were in Breaking the Waves together, and that was her first film role. She'd done a lot of theatre work before, and she was quite nervous, and she hadn't quite figured out how to translate what she knew about acting on stage to acting in front of the camera. and she asked him for advice, and he said, yes, don't aim for anything, just let go. And I just thought that was brilliant advice. But whatever whatever age you are, or whatever point of your experience as an actor, that's always a good thing to remember. And whatever plan you prepare, you plan, you think about it. It lives in your imagination, but let go.
I think that's amazing advice. I also found the scenes where, throughout the whole show, you get to see people at different stages where their skin starts to react to everything.
Yeah.
Were you on set that much with any of the actors in that makeup? And did you look at photos of actual victims from it early on?
Well, there was some in the makeup trailer as you were getting into that part of the story. The person who you see that mostly with is Adam Nagatis, who was he played Hickey in The Terror, the antagonist in The Terror. So we didn't get to work together, but we were teamed up together. I saw him again, and yeah, he spent 12 hours in makeup by the end. I think it's in episode 4. You'll see. So they used his character to show you what happens to the human body when it's severely irradiated like that, and it's horrific. Yeah, I mean, my character didn't have a little bit of that. He sort of starts to prematurely age, and all of that stuff was all very authentic. They had photographs of the people who were there. They had pictures of the people who had in hospital. So it was all very well researched by Daniel Parker did the makeup. Yeah.
And I know in writing it, obviously, they looked at a lot of personal accounts of people who were there when it happened. Did you go down that road as well for yourself?
Yeah, there's a fantastic book called Voices from Chernobyl, and they're all first-person accounts of the people who were there at the time, and they're it's an amazing collection because there's no narrative to it. There's just a collection of people telling various stories and experiences. And some of them are hilarious, but they're hilarious from this sort of very strange point of view. Not dark humor, but there's a sort of. One of the persons was talking about how her husband was irradiated, and but took quite a long time. I think it was about a 5 or 7 year process. But she said, well, something about. Asking him about how he felt about what happened, and she said, "No, I never asked him." She says, "You mustn't interrupt somebody when they're dying." And there was another amazing story about this, talking to this man they'd been evacuated to Moscow, and 2 years afterwards, he'd gone back to Pripyat and he'd stolen his front door, and he strapped his front door to his back, and then escaped on a motorbike, being shot at by the security forces. And so, of course, why? Why did you go back and steal your front door? Well, in their tradition, first of all of his children's heights were measured on the front door. But then, in their tradition, when your family members die, you lay them out on the front door, but for their passage into the next life, and then you put your door back on where it lives normally. And he needed his front door because his daughter was dying.
And in the show, I mean, we see some of the actual news coverage that was first coming out at the time. Did you watch the specific clips that were going to be in the show and kind of look at a lot of that material as well?
Yeah, they had this huge resource of material, photographs, video footage, technical information that was available to us. So yes, I saw lots of video footage. You can see the helicopter crashing. That's on YouTube. You can see the real footage of that. You can see the footage of the later on in episode 4 where they have to try and figure out how to clear the roofs, because the roofs are covered with highly radiated graphite, and they can't build the containment structure over the building until they clear the roofs, because it'll kill you. I think that one of the roofs, if you're in the proximity of that roof for longer than 2 minutes, you'll be dead in a week. And so they have to try and figure out how they're going to clear all that stuff off the roof so that they can build the containment structure over. And there's footage of that. There's this amazing speech where this guy's giving this, like, we're going to do this for Russia because we have to do it, and we're the ones here, and this is our moment. And he's giving them this sort of pep talk, like, you've seen it in, not quite as stirring as Braveheart, but that kind of thing, But yeah.
And also, because we were talking a little bit before about how you're in the first kind of 5 minutes of the first episode and then there's a bit of a gap. When you're shooting something like that, how much do you like to know about what's actually gone on with the other actors and the other scenes and how that all actually came out on camera?
You've got so much to do yourself. When we shot the end first, we shot that sequence first at my first week. And then, because nowadays they cross-board everything because it's quicker and it saves them money. So because it was 5 episodes, you could be shooting episode 2 in the morning and you could be shooting episode 4 in the afternoon. The next day you could be shooting something from episode 5, and then you could be shooting something from episode 1. I mean, you're just jumping all around the place. So you really have to, if you're not working, there's plenty to do. Even on set. In between setups, there's no excuse for sitting around and gossiping. There's lots of work to do to make sure that you're ready, because there's no time once you're there and once they're ready to shoot, there's no time to do anything else.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've realized from doing this show that still exist around Chernobyl?
Well, I was telling you before, there's after I finished this, I was telling people about that I've been working on Chernobyl, and I really, an astounding number of times, people said to me, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, didn't that accident happen because some technician dropped a hammer into the reactor?" And the effectiveness of the Soviet propaganda, even to this day, was extraordinary, because they wanted to blame it on human error. It's the same thing when a plane goes down. They want to blame the pilot because that means they don't have to fix the plane. They don't have to change the design on 400 planes, So they try to blame the operators. And there was some, as you could see, some of them were deeply at fault, but that wasn't the only thing. There was similar to when you hear about plane accidents, it's a series of 1 in a million events that if they have to happen in a specific sequence for it to happen, and that's sort of what happened with this. And it all gets explained in episode 5. Yeah, in episode 5.
So watch the whole thing.
In episode 5, they go back and I mean, it's sort of interesting, this whole design of this whole series, because the sort of first episode's a little bit like a horror story, maybe a horror movie. The second episode is sort of more conventionally in that kind of disaster genre, but then it sort of morphs into a political thriller. And then by the time you get to episode 5, it's a courtroom drama because they're trying to get the truth out. So yeah, they go back and you see the event as it leads up to it.
I wanted to jump to a couple of audience questions that we got. So Mark, we had a couple of questions that were really just asking about how you specifically like to process taking on a role, but also he was curious about how that differs to or is the same as the approach that your dad would have, and kind of, I guess, what you learned from him in how to approach research for a character.
Well, I mean, despite his reputation, he took his work very seriously. He cared a lot about his work. He spent, I don't know, of course, a decade touring Camelot around the world. So I would imagine it was exactly the same. I mean, I never discussed that with him. But I knew he cared about it. I knew he cared about his work. He enjoyed it. I think, what was the rest of that question?
It's really just about how you...
Because that's the only bit I heard was that nothing about my dad, and I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, but also just how you specifically like to prepare for a role and research for it generally.
You got to be prepared. You have to show up and be prepared. I don't like showing up I normally done a lot of parts with the accent, so my scripts have got all these sort of hieroglyphic squiggles over. And if I'm not doing an accent, I feel like I haven't done the work because my script's page is bare, and so I feel like something's gone wrong. But the research is all useful. All that stuff when I played Andy Warhol, I took a couple of I did this deep dive into the research, and then I came back and I read the script again after a couple of weeks, and I realized that none of what I'd learned was in this. About 10% was in the script. So then I was like, I'm going to talk to the director, and I'm going to, they have to put all this stuff back, and I'm going to have these scenes back in because this is really interesting, and so on. And then I realized, no, that's a different movie. And I remember something that my the principal at drama school had told me, George Hall, and he said, when a pianist sits down at a piano, they can play every note on the piano, but if they play all of them at once, it's a mess. You have to choose the moments and the rhythms to play the different notes, and the fact that you can play all the notes informs the notes that you do choose to play. So it helps. If anything, it just giving you confidence would help. Yeah.
I also always like to ask a little bit about auditioning and what you've kind of garnered over the years, because it is such an intimidating process. Everyone seems to have a lot of horror stories about it, but kind of find their own level of comfort. What are the things that you've personally decided to do when you walk into an audition?
I'll tell you a horror story. So I was auditioning for Zeffirelli's Hamlet, the Mel Gibson Hamlet. And it was about a year after I'd left drama school. And you had to catch a train, I forget at which station, and go up to the studios. And they were sort of doing everybody in half-hour segments. So on my journey, there were two people from drama school, Jason Isaacs and James Purefoy. Well, and so hey, how you doing? Or you're going, yeah. I was auditioning for Horatio, but I was not going to play Horatio. I was playing a part that maybe said, "This way, my lord," and that was it. But obviously you can't audition somebody for that, so they'd given me a speech of Horatio's. They were both auditioning for Laertes, legitimately for Laertes. So I was too embarrassed to say, I was like, oh no, I'm auditioning for Horatio. And so when we get to the station at the other end, there's a car to pick us up. And this guy's got his clipboard and he's checking, he's making sure he's got everybody. He goes, right, before I take off, just want to make sure got everyone. He goes, right, Jason Isaacs, reading Laertes. And then he goes, James Pure, and he goes, yes, him. All right, James Purefoy. He goes, me. He goes, reading Laertes as well. Whoops, maybe I should separate you two, should come sit in the front. Oh, you'll be all right back there, right? And then he goes, Jared Harris, reading Horatio, although he cannot be cast in this part.
That's horrifying.
I caused it from Jason and James. They laugh, so just tease me so much. Auditioning. I mean, a couple of things that I've learned over the years is the waiting room is just a sort of tangle of nerves, and people pick up on nerves, and people have different ways of handling those nerves. I would sign in and then get out of that room as quickly as possible. I'd let them know that I was there and then disappear so that you don't pick up on people's nerves. Some people handle nerves, they want to talk a lot, you know, and that can be distracting, you know, and then, you know, it's always weird if you're sitting in there and you realize that there's other people sitting for the same part, and then you start looking at them and you're thinking, well, why, like, are we going up for the same role? And you're like, oh, I think he'd be a lot better. You can get in your head really quickly. The other thing I've learned is don't try and make conversation. Just get on with it. A lot of times, for example, let's say on Mad Men, I was shadowing Mike Uppendall before I was allowed to direct, and then on the one that I did direct. So I was in auditions on the other side, and quite often people would say to Matt, they would want to establish a connection with him and go, oh, we know, I'm friends with so-and-so. Well, you have no idea whether they like that person. And quite often, those people would establish this connection with somebody, and when the person would go out, he'd go, I hate that. I mean, I can't believe, why do you bring that up? That person's a complete prick. And so now that person, now they've got that association with you. You have no idea what those relations are. Don't say a word. Just get into it, do it, and do a good job. Listen to the direction. If you're given direction, don't change everything. Just alter it in the direction of which they've indicated, but hang on to what you've got, unless you've done it completely wrong, which is what I did on Mad Men. When I went into audition for Mad Men, they had given you. They give me the scenes where I offer Pete Campbell and Ken the same job, but it doesn't say their names. They've changed the names, so you've no idea who you're in the scene with or who you're talking to, because they don't want anything to get out. So you don't have the script. So all I know is I'm offering two people exactly the same job. So you try and rationalize, well, why would you do that? So I would go, well, I'm some kind of Machiavel, I'm like a cat playing with mice or something. I don't quite, So I did it, and Matt goes, oh God, why does everybody do it this way? I don't understand. I don't understand. Everyone's come in, they all do it this way. And the casting director says, well, it's because you haven't given the script. They've no idea. Tell Jared what it is that you'd like him to do. So he goes, okay, I'm sorry. Look, here's the thing. You think that this is a stupid idea. Your bosses have told you to offer this job to the same job to two people. You think it's stupid, but you're doing what you've been told to do. That's what this is. And then so as soon as you get that information, then you have to come up with instant character. And then it becomes a sketch. And that's also a useful thing to have, is to learn how to sketch. We spend a lot of time preparing characters and preparing our stories and everything, and being able to come up with a sort of a quick, line drawing of a character, a sketch of a character is really important, because you never know what it is that they're going to want. You're going to have to sort of turn left quickly. So it was a little bit like that scene in Mulholland Drive. Where Naomi Watts does the first audition, and then they give her the direction and she does something completely differently. So I think it worked because I was so bad the first time. And then, yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming out and for screening Chernobyl, which premieres on HBO this week.